Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 217 and I am the show's host Kyle. On today's episode, I want to get into peace talks, and there's of course the Trump-Putin summit that's coming up, I believe, in the next week or two here now. Then the North Korean talks, Mike Pompeo just visiting Pyongyang and talking about denuclearization. We also have some peace talks going on in the African continent, so we'll get into all that kind of stuff, as well as a quick update on Russiagate. For those of you who would like to share the show, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com or libertarianinstitute.org. Just want to touch on the Russiagate stuff. So there's a story out in the Hill, and this is on an apparent deal that was being worked out between Julian Assange and his legal representation and the CIA. So if y'all remember back a few months, WikiLeaks and Julian Assange were planning what they called the Vault 7 leaks, and they were leading up to those leaks. There were a couple of kind of cryptic tweets put out by WikiLeaks and Julian Assange showing this vault that I believe is somewhere in the Netherlands or Northern Europe somewhere, I suppose. And it's got just like a library of information that's meant to survive like a nuclear war or whatever. But basically, what he says that he has here is some pretty secret stuff that the CIA is doing. And little known to all the rest of us, there's actually talks going on behind the scenes where Julian Assange is willing to not put out certain information and then also give some testimony or evidence proving that it wasn't Russia behind the DNC leaks and, WikiLeaks publishing that the Hillary Clinton's emails there. And then the story points out that Assange's lawyer mentioned this to a pretty high-ranking Senator Mark Warren. And Mark Warren has been previously discussed on the show in Russiagate episodes. I believe it was 212 with the part 2 of the Russiagate series with Joanne Leon and Dan Wright. And they explained that Mark Warner is a very powerful senator in the United States. I think he's one of, if not the wealthiest senators. And he also pushed Facebook to come up with a report saying that there were Russian ads run by the Russian government used to try to sway the U.S. election. And, this is after Facebook initially found that that wasn't the case. And so he's very much seems to be invested in this Russiagate narrative. And so after Assange's lawyer mentioned this to Warner, because I guess Assange's lawyer is an honest guy who figured, well, this Senate committee chairman should probably know about this kind of thing. So I'll let him know, and hopefully maybe this will sweeten the deal for Julian, who was looking to be able to give testimony, possibly to leave the embassy and go somewhere else, because we all know he's been locked in that embassy for about 6 years now. But anyways, once Warner tells then FBI Director James Comey kills any possible deal made between the CIA and Julian Assange, and then Assange proceeds to put out the Vault 7 emails and has not shared that information with the United States about proving it wasn't Russia behind the DNC leaks. Ray McGovern, I think, has done the best job covering this. He did an interview with Scott Horton that I'll link to in the show notes page, and also wrote an article that I'll link to in the show notes page as well. And basically what Ray is saying here is that, well, it turns out that Russiagate is becoming FBIgate, and it turns out we're finding out all about this corruption from the FBI going on here. I think I've talked about this a little in the past on the show, but it's hard to remember back to the early days of the show. But at one point there was a time where the Vault 7 emails were coming out, and this was, news. And we found out that the CIA had the ability to hack into cars that have the CPUs. And we all have seen the OnStar commercials where they're able to stop a car that's speeding or that's stolen or something like that. And so they're able to hack and force the car to accelerate. Of course, this has brought up a lot of speculation about the death of Michael Hastings. Although, I'm not sure how much I buy into that, but that's, where the connection in that story always goes. These Vault 7 leaks also reveal that the CIA was able to go in, hack somebody, and then make it look like it was somebody else. So, for example, somebody from the CIA could go and hack into, let's say, the DNC emails and make it look like, let's say, Russia was actually the ones who did it. And so, these are really important information that not only the United States got, but other governments and other countries around the world got, because they now know, let's say, they get hacked and it looks like, oh, the North Koreans did it. Well, now they know that the Americans have this program and it could actually have been the Americans trying to, stir unrest or something like that. Last thing I'll mention on the subject here is just there's a thing going on. I think it's actually over now, but it was hashtag Unity for J. And this is Julian Assange visual as he's kind of cut off from the rest of the world now. So there's a lot of people who have, either supported Julian Assange in the WikiLeaks over the years or are, fellow whistleblowers like, I believe, Daniel Ellsberg was one of the guests. Scott Horton was a guest, Ray McGovern, David Swanson. I didn't catch Caitlin Johnstone's, but I believe she was on in the early morning. And so, there was a lot of really great content there. Really cool theme song they had too that I really enjoyed. And so, for those of you interested, I'm sure you could still find those videos if you just Unity4J, the number 4, and check that out. And I'll link to it in the show notes page too. All right, so now getting into the peace talks, or what could be peace talks here. We have this planned meeting between Putin and Donald Trump in Finland. I believe that's July 19th. And a lot of people are freaking out about this meeting, especially in the mainstream media, saying that, oh, well, look, the North Korean talks are already falling apart. Now Trump's going to get in bed with Putin, and this, just proves what a puppet Putin is. And, the reason I talk about the Russiagate story so much on this podcast and why I, dedicated an entire week of episodes to it is because that narrative allows people to make ridiculous claims like Trump is a puppet of Vladimir Putin because Vladimir Putin got Trump elected. And now people, rather than celebrating the fact that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin could get together and discuss arms control, that would be beneficial to every human being on the planet, because obviously all they're talking about here is, lessening or maybe making the nuclear weapons less right, but these are just weapons of genocide. They can't do anything to help anyone. And so in any way we could either curb the growth of these weapons or maybe roll back some of the weapons that are on high alert, put, less submarines in the water, anti-missile systems, whatever you could do to lessen, the nuclear weapons is beneficial. It's also, these weapons are terrible for the environment. If they were ever used, not only would all the people exploded die, but they would just wreak havoc and wreck the environment of the entire earth. And then, they're expensive as hell. And imagine what all this other money could go to. Let's say, they just stuck it into nuclear energy research instead of nuclear weapons research. What could be, achieved in the world, and how many more people wouldn't be living in poverty without power if all these idiots would just stop spending all this money on weapons of genocide. But this is where we're at on that issue. And so, like I said, because of the Russiagate hysteria and because of the fact that, there's a lot of people in the world who, for whatever reason, refuse to believe that Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton in the election, even though she was just a terrible, terrible candidate. And all they could do is chalk it up to the fact that, well, it must have been Russia. We're now in a situation where they're all hysterical about Donald Trump looking at arms control talks with Vladimir Putin. The other big issue here that could be on the table is Syria. Assad is fast approaching the time when the only rebellion to Assad, or the only territory in Syria that Assad doesn't control, is the Syrian Kurdish territory. And of course, they're backed by the United States, and there's 2,000 or so American troops in Syria in that territory. And so if Assad looks to, assert the sovereignty that he wields as the, however legitimate leader of Syria, this could lead to a point where the United States or Assad plus Russia plus Iran are in a somewhat open confrontation with the United States. And, this needs to be worked out, needs to be talked about. So hopefully Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin could work out something here at this meeting. It does seem that Donald Trump is serious about that. He wants to get out of Syria. My hope is that, the situation is probably just too complex for him to understand. And so rather than him having to sit there and try to puzzle through what the hell is going on, he'd rather just get the hell out of town. A couple things to note while we're talking about Syria. It seems that the Jordanians have helped negotiate some kind of deal between the Syrian rebels and the Syrian government in southern Syria along the border with Jordan, and that those rebel forces have either agreed to give up and surrender or move north to the Idlib province. It looks like Assad is giving many of these people a kind of amnesty or immunity for whatever crimes they committed as part of the Syrian rebellion. And those people are going to kind of take up posts in the local government and stuff. So it seems that he's really trying to facilitate the end of this war. And I don't know if these are concessions that we've really seen the Syrian government making in other areas of Syria. But I'm sure this deal isn't going to flow perfectly in a couple weeks. Some, little pocket of Islamists are going to refuse, to follow by the terms of the peace process, and then Assad's going to bomb them. And, that's going to be a violation of the peace process too. And so, there's going to be a lot of problems here. However, it does look like we're on the path to getting rid of the Syrian rebellion there in southern Syria, especially along the Jordanian border. Now, I think this will still leave some rebels along kind of the Israel Golan Heights border with Syria there, and I think there's a pocket of ISIS there still as well. So, we're not completely out of the woods on the fighting here. Of course, that portion along the Israeli border will likely be the most contentious, as Israel time and time again has attacked the Syrian Arab army in defense of the Syrian rebels. And so, so we'll see how this goes. But it does seem that Vladimir Putin had worked out some kind of deal between, himself and Assad and Netanyahu in Israel, to where Israel isn't going to continue to support the Syrian rebels there. We got a preliminary report out on the OPCW's investigation of chemical weapons use in Douma. Now, if you look at the mainstream media, or as I think they call it in the UK, and I think I like this term more, the legacy media, you have them reporting that what the OPCW found is either evidence that chemical weapons were used, or chlorine was used, or they, found evidence suggesting that chemical weapons were used. But, the claims are pretty bold. However, there's 2 articles written by Bernard at the Moon of Alabama blog, and I'll link to those in the show notes page. And he breaks down how what was actually found were different kind of if chlorine's burned, or you're using chlorine to treat water. I think part of it was probably from melted PVC piping. And so you have these, kind of chlorine-based chemicals and whatnot that are used for civilian purposes. And when they break down, they end up giving off some of the same possible molecules or whatever that you would find if chlorine gas had been used weaponized. And so a lot of these mainstream media outlets that are very anti-Assad are taking this opportunity to claim that chemical weapons were used, when this seems to actually not have been the case. All right, North Korean talks. This is some big news out. Now, everybody's jumping to the conclusion that, let's see, the North Koreans show their true colors. They absolutely hate peace and getting along with the Americans, and they're just trying to dupe Donald Trump. Of course, if you look at what the United States has actually done, it's give up absolutely nothing. We agreed to cancel some war games that saved the U.S. some money. And of course, we could plan and have those war games at any time in the future if we so choose. So here's what happened. We have Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who's really seemed to be the one from the United States side that's doing the best job of facilitating the talks between the United States, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. And he travels to North Korea for 2-day talks. Now, if you'll remember on the last episode of the show, and I think I titled it Bolton Hates Korean Peace, we had John Bolton going on one of the Sunday morning shows and saying that I have a plan here for North Korea to denuclearize within 1 year. I'm not sure yet if that's the plan that Pompeo put on the table in North Korea, but whatever Pompeo said, the North Koreans weren't happy. They referred to the talks as regrettable. Pompeo described the talks as productive. So a lot of people are saying, well, the North Koreans, gave a negative statement on these talks, and that's showing that they're not serious about denuclearizing, and look, this is them trying to get out of it. Now, if you'll remember, the analysis on the Korean peace talk is that it's a good thing. It's moving in the right direction. Hopefully it works out, but there's going to be some setbacks, and diplomacy is a complicated kind of a thing. And it's not just going to be the United States putting proposals on the table and the North Koreans accepting them every time. I mean, it would be nice if it was that way. It would be quick. It would be easy. There would be less nuclear weapons in the world, but that's simply not what's not going to happen. Also, if you look at experts who look at this from a logistical point of view, they're saying that really you can't get all the nuclear weapons out of North Korea, just on the, logistical level of moving these nuclear weapons in a year. It's just going to take more time than that. So there's a possibility that this is just kind of a speed bump in the road. It could be the North Koreans playing a little bit of a bargaining and negotiation game, and hopefully Donald Trump, author of Art of the Deal, will understand what's going on here. And, maybe he slaps the North Koreans down a little bit and says, no, if you're going to try to play games, then we're going to, force you to make another concession on some other kind of a thing. But, this could continue to move in the right direction. I think that the big thing I'm looking for is how to see what the South Korean president does, Moon Jae-in, who's really been the facilitator of all these Korean peace talks. And I think you could say is the man really driving and waving the biggest North Korean peace flag. So we'll see if he's able to, get this stuff back on track. All right, the last kind of peace deal I want to talk about, and this is between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And these two countries fought a war in the 1990s that I believe was pretty brutal. 80,000 people or so died. And basically a peace deal was negotiated in the early 2000s, but was never fully enacted. And that's because Ethiopia continued to occupy a couple villages that I believe by the peace agreement were supposed to go to Eritrea. Luckily, rather than this, I guess, breaking back out into a full-on war, like it was kind of just in this gray zone where the peace deal wasn't fully enacted, and at the same time, there was an ongoing war between the two countries. But we got a recently elected president of Ethiopia, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his first name, but I'll spell it to you here. It's Abiy, and then his last name is Ahmed. And what President Ahmed is doing is, pushing for greater peace. He's looking to, it seems to be, create some more stability in the area. He's talked to the I believe Sudanese and the Egyptians related to Nile River dams and stuff like that, and has talked about reform in his country. Now, we'll have to see how this plays out. I don't want to, kind of create the narrative where President Ahmed here is a reformer or anything like that, because that may not be what it turns out to be, but at least early days of his presidency, that's what he's talking about. Now, there was an assassination attempt against him a week or so ago, and interestingly enough, it seemed that there was an assassination attempt against the Zimbabwean president too, who I think is currently on the campaign trail. If you remember back probably 6 months ago or so, I did a few episodes where I talked about a coup in Zimbabwe where the longtime president Robert Mugabe was removed from office, and then his wife was kind of stripped of her power as well. And his former vice president, this Mr. Emerson, and then his last name is spelled Mnagagwa, ends up taking the presidency, and there's now, going to be an election, they say, for the new president, but I'm not sure how much of a tyrant the new guy is or not. So, this seems to be a positive thing going on in the Horn of Africa. This is one of the poorest areas in the world, so, if we could start to figure out a way to get these countries getting along, trade is always a good thing, and it makes everybody more wealthy. All right, got some news out of Afghanistan. We have a U.S. service member killed in an insider attack. It seems that, this is just another one. I'm not sure how many of the 2,500 or so Americans that have died in Afghanistan have died from these insider attacks, but it's really happened quite frequently in the past few years where basically the Afghan army is very depleted, and so this either is helping to allow or not, maybe not, but anyways, there's definitely people who aren't loyal to the Afghan army who end up getting guns and training with the Afghan army, and then one day they're put in a position where they're, the Americans who are embedded with them assume they're friendly, and they turn their guns and start shooting the Americans. In the past, this has typically been something the Taliban have taken responsibility for. However, at least in the immediate hours after the attack, there hasn't been a claim of responsibility by the Taliban. And we are seeing more and more activity out of ISIS-K, the Islamic State Khorasan group, which is the Trinki Taliban group acting in Afghanistan, be more and more active there. And it could be that this is their way of, trying to get back at the Americans, because I believe the Americans killed a lot of ISIS-K guys in a bombing raid in the Nangarhar province pretty recently. So just to update the, totality of the ceasefire that we had here in Afghanistan. About a month ago, the Afghan president announced that there would be a ceasefire, a unilateral ceasefire against the Taliban. And I guess this meant that the Afghan army wasn't going to conduct any offensive operations. Now, if you looked at how things were going in the war up until that point, the Afghan army didn't seem to really be in a position where they were going to conduct any offensive operations anyways, because they were had just pretty much lost Farah City to the Taliban. And then, of course, the Taliban left, so the Afghan army was able to take it back. But there's outposts falling, and there's a lot of bad things going on for the Afghan army. And so, I guess they agreed not to take up any offensive positions or missions, and the Americans went along with this. And then the Taliban announced they would have a 3-day ceasefire, in which there was actually like kind of a peace in the war. You had Afghan army fighters meeting and hugging Taliban fighters, and peace probably in a few cities that hadn't seen peace in a very long time. The Taliban ceasefire ended after 3 days, and they continued their offensive against the Afghan army. The Afghan army, I guess, held their pledge and carried out the ceasefire for a whole month. Immediately after that ceasefire ended, the Americans carried out 20 airstrikes against Taliban targets. And, we're back to, I guess, full-scale war now in Afghanistan. The war seems to be going terrible for the American side. The Taliban continue to take points and positions in little district headquarters or outposts from the Afghan army and show that they can invade major cities if that's what they want to do. And then this kind of leaves out the growing threat and the much more violent threat of the Islamist State K group in Afghanistan. I read a story in the Wall Street Journal talking about the Saudi Arabia corruption campaign. Of course, that when this campaign started, it got big headlines because the fifth richest man in the world was imprisoned in the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh by his 30-year-old cousin Mohammed bin Salman, who was the son of the king and the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. And at that same time, he had imprisoned most of his other high-ranking cousins and even had the Prime Minister of Yemen, Hadi, and the Prime Minister of Lebanon, Hariri, under house arrest in Riyadh as well. So talk about, a really attempted power grab by Mohammed bin Salman. Now, the Ritz-Carlton was turned back into a hotel and is no longer a detention center. However, there's still a high-ranking prince, and that is the son of the former King Abdullah, who is still detained by his cousin and I guess is refusing to sign any kind of deal pleading guilty to corruption that his cousin is demanding that he sign. And he's also arresting other people, including the head of the Bin Laden construction firm, which I think is a pretty powerful venture capitalist kind of firm in Saudi Arabia, and I think is run by one of Osama bin Laden's cousins now. So it's just interesting that this is completely faded out of the headlines, yet is still going on. Mohammed bin Salman's, kind of attempt, I guess, consolidation of power and wealth of Saudi Arabia. In Yemen, we have another bombing of a Yemeni wedding. This time, 11 people are killed. Last Friday, Jane Ferguson's third part of her PBS NewsHour series on Yemen ran. Excellent series. I recommend checking out all 3 videos. She does probably the best job of any mainstream news outlet has done so far in the 3.5 years of the Yemeni war, covering the humanitarian crisis in northern Yemen. It just hasn't been done. And she did it and did an absolutely excellent job. In the first, or in the last episode of the show, I kind of went over some of the main critiques I had of, kind of what she has said. But in the last one, she lets the Houthis speak and gives them a platform to explain, why they are anti-American, why they are anti-Saudi Arabia, and why they are not supported by Iran and they're not getting weapons from Iran. She allows them to explain that their missiles are not coming from Iran, but were seized by them when they took the capital city of Sana'a in 2014, and they have since upgraded those missiles. And this is exactly what Scott Ritter has reported, what IHS Janes has confirmed, and something that's been talked about on the show time and time again, that these are not Iranian missiles that the Houthis are using either to shoot at the invading armies or to shoot at Saudi Arabia. You also have her interviewing Houthi supporters or members of the Houthi political kind of organization that they have. And, they're explaining that, look, these are American planes that are dropping American-made bombs, and America has all the power at the UN. So why the hell isn't America stopping this war against us? And, they kind of explain why they don't like the Americans and why they hate the Americans. This isn't something that you typically see, a reporter going out there and letting the opposition speak. But again, excellent job. Really good. Everybody should go listen to it and check out. Like I said, it's a 3-part series. It's probably like 25 minutes total, but great, worth watching. She does an excellent job of covering it. In there, she gets a quote from James Risch, who is a Republican senator from Idaho, I believe. And what this senator says is that, well, this is all Iran's fault. Because Iran's in Yemen, that means that Saudi Arabia has to be in Yemen, and Saudi Arabia has a right to defend itself. Now, of course, this shows that this guy knows absolutely nothing about the war in Yemen. It's not because Iran was there that Saudi Arabia went to war. They said they went to war to restore the rightful ruler of Yemen to the throne of power, that being Hadi. And so, while the truth is that, you know, Saudi Arabia's mission is to reinstall Hadi, this guy is claiming that it's to get Iran out of the country, which Iran isn't even there in the first place. There's a great clip in her story where there's a Yemeni guy there pointing and going, that guy's Yemeni, that guy's Yemeni, that guy's Yemeni. Where are all the Iranians that you're talking about? All right, a couple more stories I want to get to before I wrap up here. The U.S. Border Patrol has apparently stopped and boarded about 10 Canadian fishing ships in some disputed island areas between the United States and Canada. Now, I guess in the past, this has never really been an issue because we're allies, and come on, let's all be civil about it. We're really not going to fight a war over a couple of islands between our two countries. However, the United States, I guess, is now harassing the Canadian fishermen in the area. I find it interesting that's the Border Patrol doing it, say they're looking for immigrants. It just seems like another power grab from the United States Border Patrol that we've seen them being able to get away with so much under Donald Trump. The last thing is I've seen a lot of reporting now that Donald Trump has apparently been pushing for U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. This seems like about the worst idea that Donald Trump has probably ever had. It would blow up in his face, possibly even worse than Iraq blew up in George Bush's face. And so he definitely shouldn't do it. And hopefully they could keep talking him out of it. They say on several occasions they've had to talk him out of it. But this is something I'm going to cover in the future on this show. A really good in-depth look in what's going on in Venezuela. Because I do think that that's probably one of the countries on the list of next possible interventions, along with Iran. It would be another one that, you know, I would put at the top of that list. All right, that's where I'm going to wrap up today's show. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, libertarianinstitute.org, immersionnews.com is the news website. If you want to contact me on Twitter at KYAAALE, on Facebook, the page is Libertarian Union. There's a bunch of great podcasts there. I saw just a minute ago that Patrick McFarland, the host of Liberty Weekly, was live talking about a series that he's working on with another podcast in that group, Actual Anarchy, that does movie reviews, a really cool show there. So check that out. And then, you know, if you really support the show and you really like it, foreign policy, or patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus. Thanks, everyone.